Welcome to the VC React podcast, where we bring you insights and reactions from top VCs reacting to weekly news on startups, VC funds, and investment rounds. Our VC guests today are Issa Aghabi, founder and managing director at Access Bridge Ventures, and Zeina Mandour, investment manager at Dar Ventures. In the video description, you can find more details on our guests, their LinkedIn profiles, and links to their companies' websites. Our weekly news are brought to you by FWDstart, the #1 news aggregator that sends you MENA startup and VC news directly to your inbox twice a week. And as always, from FWDstart, we have my co-host, Jamie. What's happening this week, Jamie?
Yeah, look, let's kick things off in Oman this week, if you wouldn't mind, with the Omani climate tech startup called 4401, which initially, I have to admit, I thought was a rather strange or slightly jarring name. But if you're in on the joke, it is indeed the carbon's molecular mass. So obviously it's not a B2C company. So for those in the know B2B, it's pretty clever. And it's a bit less on the nose than, for instance, its competitor, I think in Iceland, is called CarbFix, which is, so I think 4401 is slightly nicer. So basically they've raised a 37 million Series A. So this is for its mineralization technology. Essentially, the goal is to eliminate CO2 safely, permanently, and at scale by turning it into rock, of all things. So essentially, the company's tech accelerates the natural process of CO2 mineralization. So it removes carbon from the air, but it can also remove it from industrial processes as well. So there's a direct air capture component, but also you can transport carbon directly from industrial sources, and it can be injected into the ground as well externally. And it did all this in less than 12 months. The process generally can take years and years and years. So this massively reduces the length of time. Currently, I guess you'd say there's two main methods exist for carbon sequestration underground. You've carbon mineralization. So this is the method pursued here by 4401. As I mentioned, CarbFix, an Icelandic company, they do something similar, but the type of rock is basalt. In this instance, it's periodite. And the other example then is what they call supercritical CO2 storage. So that involves storing CO2 underground in sort of disused oil or gas reservoirs. It's much cheaper. I think it's about 3 times cheaper than the mineralization method, but it is much riskier in that there is the opportunity for that carbon that's captured to leak back into the atmosphere. In terms of the deal itself then, the round was led by Equinor Ventures and Shuruk Partners, with participation from a whole host of climate-focused investors. I'm not going to go into all of them because there's a lot of them there. I guess one of the standout ones, potentially Amazon's Climate Pledge Fund, I thought was pretty interesting. Planet A Ventures, the European-based VC, committed, I think, exclusively to climate tech solutions. And their seed round was also backed by Sam Altman's Apollo Ventures, which is dedicated to moonshots, is what they described that as. So in terms of what they're looking to do with the funding, it's just to commercialize technology in Oman and the UAE initially. They've had a couple of successful pilot projects in Fujairah and the Hajar Mountains in Oman.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. I'll share my screen and just share a few things that I noticed on this deal. So first of all, let's look at the funding history. So in total, they raised, according to Crunchbase, they raised $43.2 million in 4 rounds, or at least 3 rounds, and there's a grant that they received. I looked at the founders' backgrounds. So the CEO, the founder and CEO, he studied law and business. First of all, he worked as a lawyer, and then he joined private equity firms in Oman. And the last one, I think, was IDO Investment in Oman. And then
who invested in this round?
Who invested in this round? Yes, exactly. And then he co-founded another company, Wuqud, which also in the energy. It's a biofuel company. And then they started 44. That's the first founder. Second founder is also coming from business background, so not technical again. consultation, and then they started for 44. I think the only technical founder is this guy, Ihab. He studied robotics and automation, and he worked some technical jobs here and there before he joined the team and started 44.01 with the rest of the team. So what do you think about the company so far?
Looking at the press release itself, first two things that pop into my head. Good, there is now money going into non-traditional sectors that we looked at in the region. Historically, in the MENA, we tend to see a lot of deals within, your typical status quo, like, areas that are still underdeveloped and need a lot of help, fintech, e-commerce, AI now is a bit of a trend and so on. So money going into, which seems like an R&D type of business that requires a lot of that, and energy and clean energy, or whatever this sector is going to be called, is positive. So I think that's far and foremost, that gives me a bit of, it's positive, right? The issue that I see, like for someone like us, if something like this came to us, I don't understand this space. So it's very difficult for people like me to invest in it unless, one of our partners, or we have someone in the team or an advisor of some sort that can give us those insights and educate us. But I think far and foremost, great, money not going to traditional sectors, going into R&D and more sectors that we don't see a lot of money coming into. But the other point that popped into my head is what you just highlighted in that screenshot. It's a long list of VCs coming into the transaction. 37 million and 44 throughout their life cycle, or is that their name? Sorry. That's a lot of money going to a Series A. That's a lot larger than what you typically see. And maybe the labels are a bit different and whatnot, but that's a lot of money going to the Series A. And it goes back to the point that, I don't know, we've noticed, we keep saying MENA region is improving a lot when it comes to funding and funding for startups. There is still a big gap for later stage or large checks, as you can see, where you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 VCs participating to club that round together. It's great that they managed to do that, but I wonder what effort went into getting this deal done and having that many people come together, negotiating, transacting. So it goes back to a point that was in my, I was thinking about is how do companies, especially in niche sectors that are not as popular, are able to raise big rounds, and clearly they have to club it and get someone to lead and so on. So these are two high-level quick reflections on that piece of news. But overall, exciting. And I know a lot of, sovereigns who support funds like us have been pushing on within their internal investment mandates to push for more energy, food security, and so on and so forth, which are not your status quo, let's say, sectors that we tend to focus on.
Basically, it's a research and development company, right? It's 4 years in, a big team, $43 million so far, no revenues at all yet. It's only 2 pilot projects so far that prove the technology. So it's a technology company. It's a technology innovation. Zeina, what do you think about this? Especially that in the MENA region, what we see usually is copycats. We find a successful model in a developed market, whether it's in the US or in Europe. We take that model, apply it here, and then investors would invest in this, knowing that it's a less risky investment. But this is a risky one. Jamie, you mentioned that it's a fund that invested in this was a Moonshot fund. So Zeina, what do you think?
Definitely, I echo what Issa said. Like, there's something good that we're looking into this. But the reason why people are starting to invest first is like what happened, which is building on our last week podcast. Simply, things are changing. There is a new sectors people start to look at because there is a need now, because timing is very important. Maybe this idea was interesting back then, but the timing was not aligning with the strategic direction of governments for whatsoever. Because this is, again, this project is not only, it is B2B and almost B2G in a way or another. So this is not a project that normally focuses on consumer need. This is direction coming from all the people taking initiative related to the net zero and all of this, and decarbonization. There's a lot of things tie into this. Is maybe the right time that we look into this. On top of that, that's why a lot of LPs are mandating, especially development banks, mandating this, because this is coming, especially if your headquarters coming from Europe, because this continent is the one who's pushing now, because makes sense. They are affecting what's happening globally when it comes to the weather and all of that. This is part of it. And the second thing is, when you look at especially this round or the existing investors, when it comes to this transaction, there's multiple players coming from the industry in a way or another. So the strategic investors, they understand, and this is give confidence. Like, this type of investment is understandable that the VCs will not take the risk, or they cannot comprehend 100% unless you are focusing on climate or focusing on this sector. If you are sector focused, it will make sense that you take the action, because when you build your investment thesis and when you went to fundraise with LPs, you told them, this is the sector I'm focusing, and this is the expertise that I will be able to assess, like the Fintech and all of that. And we started to see climate focused funds that at least looking into the region, like Fifth Wall, this is what's happening now. So on this, to be able to assess the opportunities, you have to understand the industry to give you the confidence that I wait 4 years. Like I said, even when it comes to Series A part, there's no revenues. They're still doing the pilot. This is an R&D work, and they're still focusing. And even with the pilot, maybe it will be ready for commercialization or not. If I don't understand it, and if I don't see how big is this potential, because I come from this industry as a strategic investor, no one will be able to do that.
Yeah. So you both, Zeina and Jamie, you both mentioned that there's a B2B component to it. When I saw the news, I automatically assumed that it's B2G. So they're selling governments, right? And I struggled to understand how they're selling to other businesses. So I saw this picture. It's basically direct air capture. This is their model. They take the carbon and mix it with water and then inject it in rocks. So this doesn't seem like a B2B business model. But then I saw this picture and I got a better understanding of how this can happen or can be offered to B2B. Do you want to comment on this, Jamie?
Yeah, so I mean the partnership in Majera was with ADNOC. It was with ADNOC and Mandour, so the Abu Dhabi solar company. So in terms of, I guess, the solution that they're offering, I think what it seems as if, as I mentioned, there's two components. Obviously, you can directly capture it from the air, but also from an industrial perspective, there's the possibility to partner with companies. For instance, steel manufacturing potentially could be one example, whereby they capture the carbon directly at source and then transport that carbon to the secure location where periodite is amply available, and they can inject that there into the ground. So it is interesting. And another interesting point as well is, I guess, obviously their solution that they offer is the actual mineralization of carbon. They don't offer a solution to actually capture the carbon. So they are sort of beholden to partner with direct air capture companies. So for instance, the pilot that they had recently in Oman, I think they partnered with, I can't remember the name of the company now, but it's a UK-based direct air carbon capture company. On that one, that was one that was successful in winning the X Prize, Elon Musk's competition. And they also, I believe, are scheduled to have another pilot at the end of 2024. And that's partnering with Air Capture, who are one of the largest carbon capture companies in the States as well. And it is interesting as well, like, to push back, I guess, a small bit on the moonshot point on one level, if I can. I guess it is a moonshot, but at the same time, carbon sequestration has been around for decades. So it's not a new technology in any way, shape or form, really. It's just been expensive and the incentive hasn't been there. The incentive is there now. It's shiny, people are aware. And I think one of the most interesting things with 4401 is that it's been a sort of masterclass in PR in one level. I mean, they really leaned into this mineralization side of things, the, I guess, unique fact that it's rock, it's transforming CO2 into rock. They've done the sort of international prize route. They've participated in Elon Musk's the X Prize twice. They won the Earthshot Prize. In terms of, I guess, the way that they present the company as well. I mean, the marketing is beautiful in terms of they really lean into the natural landscape of Oman. It's,
Jamie, okay, let me disagree with you now a little bit. So I know the carbon capture technology has been there for a while, but it was, according to this picture that we just saw, the traditional way to do this is to capture the carbon, transport it, and then inject it into the oil and gas wells. Somehow, but this one is a little bit different. They mix it with water and inject it into rocks. It becomes rocks, and in a year, instead of taking tens of years to do that process naturally. So there is some innovation here. So I would give them some more credit on that.
No, absolutely. But look, I guess if I'm being unfair or difficult, as much as it is innovation and it's not a copycat, there is an Icelandic company, Carbfix, who, implemented this solution many years ago as well with basalt. So it is an element of transferring that same solution with a different rock type. So ultramafic, I think it was mafic in that instance, it's ultramafic here. In fact, the actual consulting scientist on 4401 was actually the scientist who was in charge of Carbfix in the Icelandic context as well. So as much as, I guess, the technical team, the team isn't overly technical in 4401, but in fact, the consulting scientist who sort of validated the solution.
So they have the right
in
people
the
around them to get it done.
They do, exactly.
Yeah, which is not bad. And this goes back to the point that, I think you guys mentioned a few times, and clearly you guys know the space better than I do because I've been a bit more quiet than my usual verbose stuff. But is this whole copycat culture, copycat approach? Listen, I've been doing VC for some time. There is nothing wrong with copycats. And actually, most successful companies in the world are not the ones who necessarily innovate the first. You look at Apple, right? iPod, etc., etc. And I think in the region, historically, and it goes back to what you were mentioning, Ahmad, is like a lot of what we see are local or regional adaptations of a business model or a business that works. And this is, in a way, potentially taking something that was established outside, adapting and refining it to what works within this part of the world and the Omani climate, and specifically the GCC one. And that's innovative, I find it, in a way, right? And again, the biggest problem we have in MENA region, not necessarily directly to this deal specifically, is we call ourselves the MENA region, right? On the outset, when you first heard the word MENA, you'd be like, oh, okay, nice. It's one big homogenous market, but we're not. We're a bunch of countries that not necessarily play nice to each other, especially from a regulatory perspective. Each one has their own rules and regulations. And for you to succeed, climate aside, you need to figure out that, ring road around the Middle East, starting from like Egypt to Levant to GCC, Iraq, and so on and so forth. And whoever manages to figure it out with local adaptations succeeds. And that's really the uniqueness of this part of the world. It's just takes so much more effort to make it work because you don't have to figure it out for one specific big market, a la the US, for example. It's different. But going back to this one specifically, again, I have no idea. But from what you're saying and what we've read, seems innovative. The fact that people put $40 million in it, it's different. But it goes back the DNA of that investor, right? And I think Zeina was trying to allude to it. And yes, we are seeing a bit more specialist funds in this part of the world that focuses on certain niches. I know there's a couple here and there that focus on fintech. It's quite a large space. Energy after COP and Expo and so on. A lot of money is being poured into this space more globally, a bit more regionally. So you're seeing the emergence of niche and sector focused funds, which was never the case before, because again, it's still a nascent region, not a lot of money. Pipeline is improving, so you can't cherry pick within a small niche where you can now to a certain extent, I guess. I know in the past people have tried to do gaming funds, energy funds, not energy, sorry. Gaming is the one that pops to my mind. Oh, education funds and so on. But ended up changing to more diverse approach to, to make the economics work, right?
You also mentioned that you can't imagine how hard this deal was, getting all these investors together in one round, and especially that we have a fund by Sam Altman, or maybe Sam Altman is the main LP in that fund. So for founders now here in the Middle East, trying to get international investors, what do you think, Zeina and Issa, what do you think the approach should be? They're working on an innovative new technology or a deep tech company or maybe a fintech company. How can we, the founders in the Middle East, approach international investors?
Each investor looking into the opportunities, pretty much they look at the same things, but everyone has their own way. What is they prioritize, what they look at, which is part of their investment thesis or structure. This is how everyone makes money in a different way. But I think at least when you look at the region, which is building on Issa was saying, that's very challenging. Once you hit a specific milestone, post Series A or the checks become bigger, it's very, very challenging to fundraise locally or from the regional. You have to go outside because no one can afford it. Even if you manage to do, luckily for them, they managed to pull all of this money. But when it comes to what's happening next, and this is, I always advise even the portfolio companies, you need to have someone on your current cap table that could help you in the fundraising for the next round, not from a doubling down, but at least from a network perspective. This is even if I'm getting for this fund with a small check, but at least I know the network that will help me to structure this. So I think when I go to talk to and this is some mistakes people do when they, especially if they are sector focused and they cannot find existing investors that are willing to invest in this sector and they don't understand it. So they say, fine, I will go to the external people or the outside from the Western world. When they go there, people, if they don't understand our market, they shy away or they give initial commitment and tell, I'm happy to give money, but get me someone from your country, because this is people understand your market. Let them anchor the amount of money, and then I'm happy to follow on. You will find, I'm not saying this will never happen, but it's rarely or exceptional that someone never invested in the region to lead around with a sector, with a market they don't understand.
And let's not forget that the founder lived in London and studied in London, and he has connections, and he brought some investors from there as well. Before
and he was working with one of the funds as well, which is, this is,
yes.
And this comes, like I said, when it comes to criteria, what you look at a company, you look at the team, you look at the market, you look at the product, and there is semantics comes from this.
Yeah.
This is definitely, even when you were saying that the main two founders, they are not in the non-technical, I think maybe 7 or 10 years ago, everyone will always need to invest in a pure technical founder to relate to the product. People will say, if you don't have it, I'm not investing. People changing their mindset now because the innovation comes from, maybe it's not the technology, but how the operating model and how they are actually commercializing. This is where it comes to the uniqueness of the idea, because we don't know what's happening inside the company. Maybe that's why people invest in, even though two out of the 3 are commercial or business driven, because it's meant, maybe you can find people build the product, but not everyone will be able to sell the product. So maybe this is what has been needed in this. And you see a lot of funds, when they do them, the multiply effect or whatsoever, I will invest in a co-founders. I have seen it when I was in my previous job, family offices, when funds come to fundraise from us, they come and I see how they're sourcing the strategy. They say, how I will source that this founder was part of a company I invested in fund 1, and now these people will go out and take this experience and recreate new opportunities and all of that. This is actually one of the sourcing techniques a lot of VCs do, especially here in the region, and this is somehow echoes what happened with this opportunity.
Fully agree. Yeah, Issa, what do you think?
Right now, funding globally is problematic. Take a look at the VC landscape in Europe, the US. Let's say Europe, because I'm more closer to that right now. It's tough. Companies that are doing well and performing well are challenged to fundraise, especially at the later stage. I don't think this is the case potentially for the region, because there has been a hype. There's a lot of sovereigns push to help support create these liquidity pools or funds that are investing in the landscape. So I think at the beginning of the life cycle, you will end up attracting more local money. It shouldn't be as difficult as it was 10 years ago in business. Obviously, if the sector is niche, that is not the status quo, then it may be a bit more problematic. And especially if you're in R&D like this one, you would hope there would be a lot of more grants, as well as government, universities, subsidies, and support of some sort. That being said, and I think this is what Zeina alluded to, is having on your cap table, understanding the funding journey for you down the line early on is very helpful. So this is something we like to discuss because we are seed investors predominantly at Access Bridge. So it's something we like to understand early on with entrepreneurs. What is that funding journey over the next 24, 48 months? Where do you see yourself going? Who are our ideal targets? And we start building that early on and supporting them in doing so. But end of the day, it's not difficult to get to people. If you're a good business that's performing well, you will get to the right people, either be through your existing network or your existing investors and the wider LP networks that your existing investors have. So I think tapping into that, but aligning early on is very important. I'll give you a simple example. We have a business that is focused on, we've developed some sort of a unique technology that serves the e-commerce business. And we really know the path of that business from Series A to B, where they need to be, what geographies they need to be, and how they get out of the region potentially, or if they are outside the region, how they solidify certain markets. So we started identify in 5 years' time who our potential exits are, or who our acquirers are going to be, and started working backwards. How is the best way to get to that path as one option? So there's many different ways to get to that, to answer your question, but generally speaking, is just have a clear understanding. Obviously, if you're a seed startup, everything may change in a month or two. You can throw your business plan in the garbage. But more importantly is like aligning on what it is, that path, how long you need to get there, and starting to build those relationships and so on and so forth. There's also a lot of global and international VCs pouring into the region. At some point, we're making a joke, if you go to the Four Seasons around FII times, like you're sitting on Sample Road, right? So there's a lot of VCs tapping into the money or the pools of capital that the sovereigns are deploying in this asset class. And it's no longer, from what I see, the easy days where, come take our money and generate returns. I think that's fundamentally the thesis. Yes, we want to make money if we're investing in funds or businesses. But there's always now, and you're seeing a lot more of it, I think, talk about last week, there's a lot of kickback to the region. So if you take money from me, you have to do something within this part of the world. So identifying those early on is a smart way to do it, because there's a lot of money being deployed, and some of that has to be recycled in this part of the world. So that may potentially hit a checkbox for a good VC if you're a good company and you can potentially get that money. Just
and energy is one of the biggest challenges here in the region. In addition to the favorites of fintech and AI and all other trendy technologies. But moving on to fintech now, Jamie, what do you have for us for the next story?
Yeah, moving on to an old favorite. So DuPay, their fintech startup, they've announced the closing of a 13.5 million Series A extension round. So this follows the previous 18 million Series A, so brings the total funding up to 31.5 million. This was led by Argentum Creek Partners. I think they're based in New York. I think they potentially have an office in Abu Dhabi, as well as Minnesota, if memory serves me correctly. So DuPay, they're a digital payroll and payments platform, so that serves primarily unbanked and underbanked workers in emerging markets. So in terms of how it works, DuPay's platform allows businesses to open accounts for employees and other beneficiaries, so facilitates real-time payments. So each account comes with a prepaid debit card, so that's in partnership with MasterCard. So that offers 24/7 access to funds via ATM withdrawal, and obviously they can also use the card anywhere where MasterCard is accepted too. So in terms of the goal, or the reason behind the extension round, it'll enable DuPay to accelerate expansion in Egypt, and also launch a range of new financial services as well. So it's planning to expand, or it's actually planning to add financial products such as earned wage access, personal loans, credit cards, business loans, insurance, etc. further down the road as well. So it's an interesting one.
Just following up on the point that we said earlier, international investors are looking at the region, investing in the region. This is a New York-based investor, and they focus on emerging markets. And the main picture on their website is a picture from Riyadh, and they have invested in this company. Here, let me look at the funding history for this company first. According to Crunchbase, in 2014, that was the seed round of only $120K. And after that, in 2016, they had $2.4 million in seed. In 2019, there was a convertible note of 1 million euros. And then in 2021, that was the first Series A, or the original Series A, of $18 million. And now they're extending this Series A. Before I forget, I want to ask about the extension. This is a long time between the original Series A and its extension. We're talking about, 3 years now? It's not usual to have such an extension. Why isn't it a Series B? Is it at the same valuation of the Series A 3 years ago? Does that mean that the company did not grow that much in all that time? I wanna dig deeper into those details. Before doing that, I just looked at the company here, and I saw how many members or team members are there. It seems that it's a big company, 113 team members. and they looked at the CEO, France, and interestingly enough, Ahmad Nasif, who used to head Maktoob, that was acquired by Yahoo, is the CEO of this company. Go ahead, Issa.
No, it's a very good question. Why is this labeled as a Series A, not Series B? This is why I sometimes take everything you read with a grain of salt. I'm not saying this is an example of that, but usually people like to, position in certain ways to deliver a certain strategic value or strategic vision of some sort or outcome when it comes to the PR. I've had companies who've clubbed 4 rounds together and called it a 3A or a bridge round or an A. It's like labels are just so confusing nowadays, because what used to be an A now used to be a C or a B 10 years ago, and it keeps changing. But I think to answer your question, I don't know if it was a down round, flat round, or any of that. But take a look at when the last round was raised and what's happened to Egypt over the past 3-4 years from a macro situation that should allude to potentially as everyone and every startup we've seen, even our portfolio in Egypt, have struggled, right? The economy has not been doing the best. Every dollar you've invested is probably now worth 30 cents. There's fundamentally a lot of issues. This cycle has not been pretty. And especially when it comes to fintech, and depends on the model, becomes even more problematic, right? So if you are a lending platform, access to debt is going to be exhausting, right? Especially that most debt providers are dollar-based and outside Egypt. There are local ecosystems when it comes to debt provider, but most of them are abroad. So that aspect of raising debt for fintech is a big problem, right? Add to that, if you find the person who's going to give you that, I wonder how exuberant those rates are going to be and how economically sustainable those debt facilities are going to. So there's a lot of issues fundamentally when it comes to fintech or in Egypt right now that may has led to this. But the space itself, I find personally exciting. In specific, early wage access, facilitating. It's historically has been a big problem, not just in Egypt, across the GCC. I've seen 4 or 5 startups that similar things in the UAE and Saudi, because that's also a massive problem here. Not necessarily to support, in Egypt it's a bit different. You're supporting local ecosystem by local startups. With the GCC, specifically this space, it's more so expats. Either it be from the Middle East, from Asia, and how do you facilitate their wage access to remittance? Big problem. And then the fintech facilities that you can bring to the table to that gives them those options or services that they may or may not need, right? And that is a big problem, because regulation is a big problem here. The power of existing players in the market that are not your typical tech startups, the exchanges, let's say in the UAE and Saudi, are so strong, right? And they have these solutions in-house. So it begs the question, are these business and services, or are they a solution or for a small problem within a big organization, or are they full-fledged businesses?
Zaina, I'll give you the same question, but also I'll add to that, and me playing the devil's advocate here. Why is it so hard for people to open bank accounts? Banks are everywhere, and they're trying to reach all the unbanked population. So they're competing with that. And now we have tech startups. Many tech startups are trying to target the unbanked. What's the problem here?
Talking specifically in Egypt, right? Or you're talking about the region?
In Egypt and everywhere.
I think it's the same everywhere,
yeah. I think there's, and if you look, it has a multiple aspects, but related to, by the way, the mentality of the people, actually, when you're talking about, or if you look at the way that the population it is. For instance, I'll talk about Egypt because this is definitely the most market that I understand. Majority of the population is not even class C or D, is much lower than this, and the way things are, we are cash based, so they work in like a gig economy or something like this. So the transaction is happening, and even the money, they take it on a weekly basis. Some people actually are on a daily wages, and the money comes in, the ones that comes in, it goes out right away. So to facilitate transaction or to go, because it doesn't make sense to go to a bank because things are in and out in a minute. So this is part of it. And at the same time, there are other people, actually, it is interesting enough, a lot of, because our family business related to, we have a farm of oranges, and so we have a lot of labor, and we do that. A lot of people outside of Cairo or have the perception of, if someone passed away and you have a bank account in the bank, the bank will actually be part of the inheritance. Because in some point back then it was
There is truth to that, by the way.
Yeah. Because in some point, it was the case. So they don't want to, even it's not the case anymore.
Okay.
So they don't want to do that, and it's still the segment. So, and if we look at the bank, for instance, here in Egypt, because of the KYC, it's a challenge. So when ask someone, you need to have an HR letter, he was like, what HR letter? I'm working on a gig part of it. I'm not sure what to do. So this is, even the KYC doesn't encourage people. However, there's a specific time where in Egypt, once a year, they do the financial inclusion. Everyone can open bank account and there is no fees. But this is like for what, a year or 2 years, and then they ask them for a fees and they ask them for KYC documents and all that. So people, I will close the bank account. I'm not really using it. So if you are cash-based economy, the KYC is not encouraging people. And when it comes to working with small businesses, it is very challenging to open even a bank account for a small businesses. On top of that, the currency issue and the dollars and all that, I'm asking when they're coming in and out. And it's important to do for a money laundry and for a lot of reasons to do the KYC and understand this, but it has to have a flexibility, at least with a specific ticket size, and you cannot ask for the same information when it comes to a small person that's coming in with the same like corporate, or the transaction flow is different.
And maybe taxes play a role in this. People trying to avoid taxes.
Yes, definitely. This is what my second point. Taxes.
I think. Sorry, I thought you were done.
No, please go ahead.
No, I think it's a catastrophe. The banking infrastructure, not just here, globally, I think is archaic. I'm not going to name a certain company in North America. We had a certain. I had to get a small facility just to get something done. It took me 4 or 5 months. It's archaic. But going back to your question, in this part of the world, I'm going to segment it into like businesses and individuals. More so, your question was individual, but I like to talk about businesses too. When it comes to individual, end of the day, a bank needs to be money. If you're a low frequency, low utilization user, they don't really care, right? It's a business, it's profitable. So that's why solutions like this become valuable, because they focus on monetizing across volume. But then, like, even when you figure out a way to bank the unbanked, how do you provide them with the facilities and services? It's exhausting. It's very difficult. We invested in a company a while back in Egypt that did that. How can I create a credit profile for an unbankable individual in Egypt? And they created a very, very unique technology, very, very unique one that takes 2,500 plus data points about that individual and creates a credit profile. In certain cases, using simple things like SMSs and how often do you recharge your phone to create that uniqueness and understanding of it. So it's a very difficult path, and we can talk about that for hours. But also from a corporate perspective, it's a nightmare. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever tried to open a bank account in the GCC. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. I get KYC'd every year. Again, normal course of business. We're a regulated fund, we're a regulated entity, but it shouldn't take me 6 months to open up a bank account where, 5 or 80% of my funds as a fund come from very reputable family offices or sovereigns backers. It doesn't make sense. And to add to that, small complications. I don't know if you guys remember, probably not. Maybe like 9 years ago, there was a small change in KYC rules across the GCC and specifically in the UAE. Boom. All banks accounts frozen. You can't use your bank account. I remember we were an e-commerce business back then. How can you transact? We, as a few of the funds back then backing them, ended up being their bank for a month till they figured out the 3-4 UBO KYC documents. So again, there's a lot to be done to fix the banking infrastructure. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of fintech businesses emerging.
Especially in here. But you know what?
I think, the
here.
challenge is, I think we're glad because Issa said that the regulation is a nightmare, because the issue is, at least again in Egypt, I see an opportunity and I know what is the solution, and I've developed the tech solution, but for the regulation to approve, or even the regulation doesn't work against you in a way or another, that they launch something similar or whatever, because at the end of the day, the government or whoever entities they govern, they are not placed to produce a product that could compete with the private sector in a way or another, and this sometimes happens. So this is a huge challenge, and people that they invest in a startup, they understand that, especially if you are a fintech, and this is where that a lot of startups, they go to specific funds because they help them to acquire the license, because without a license you can work whatever under for temporary, but once you hit the threshold you cannot operate anymore. So it requires another thing, which is the very, very challenging part, and even the opportunity is big.
Yeah, and by the way, this challenge is not only here. Even in the US, there are millions of undocumented illegal immigrants. And although in the US, you can open a bank account, even though you're not documented, but most of the immigrants, the undocumented immigrants, they're afraid of going to the bank. They're afraid of interacting with anything that would require an ID from them. So a solution like the Do Pay solution could actually work in there as well. It's a very innovative solution, and I think it would work in the US for that target group of undocumented workers. Anyway, Jamie, what's our last story for today?
So last up, we have UAB's Majera. So they're an Arabic digital content provider. They've acquired the NLP, so natural language processing provider, LabLib. So that's for an undisclosed amount. Don't have details on what the actual acquisition fee is. Majera, they're originally known as Heykal Media. They provide a single subscription platform for premium Arabic content. So I guess key platforms under Majera would include Harvard Business Review, Arabia, MIT Technology Review, Arabia, Popular Science, etc. LabLib, on the other hand, then, so there's search as a service platform, so they enhance user engagement on websites, mobile apps, and SaaS platforms, so improve the search experience. So as part of the acquisition, LabLib, they're going to maintain operational independence under Majera's ownership. And I did think it was quite interesting as part of the release that they particularly name checked that, you know, they're going to drive innovation, but particularly in deploying a large language model for practical applications in the Arab speaking world. So I thought that was particularly interesting.
I was looking at, again, LinkedIn profiles of the companies and the founders and the main employees. Majera is a big company with 146 employees. However, LabLib is a smaller one, 14 team members. It seems it's a tech and an acquihire acquisition. And as I think you mentioned that, Jamie, both companies will keep their brands. It's not going to be a full integration. So LabLib will still keep their brand and keep serving their customers. And I wanted to ask about first the acquisition itself. I'm happy to see those small acquisitions, or let's say consolidations between smaller companies in the region, so that we will have bigger companies faster. That's one. The second question is the business model of Majera. It's a paid content versus the most popular one is free content, and you monetize through advertising. And the biggest competitor to this is actually in Jordan, Mandour. What do you think? Thoughts about this?
Listen, I think I'll jump in. M&A is great, very important. Getting M&A to work is more difficult than a potential full-out exit, because you have to manage so many different stakeholders across different scenarios, right? So you have to manage your internal stakeholders, so the team, the entrepreneurs, and their incentivization. How incentivized are they, and what the long-term trajectory is for them with this new potential vehicle or entry. And B, managing internal investors and the egos associated with that. It's I'll probably have like 5 or 6 M&As throughout my career. One recently, which was done from an Egypt company to a Kuwaiti one. It's tough. It takes a long time managing people, managing early investors versus later investors, managing the waterfall, the liquidity preferences. It's just exhausting. But I think M&A in this age and time, in this part of the world, is imminent and very important, and we need to focus on it. And I wish there are more outlets that emerge to help support and streamline this process for a lot of us. Why? Because, again, going back to trends, you're seeing a lot of companies doing similar things across the value chain. Let's not think about AI because that's like the flavor of the month, right? And there's so many, every other deck we're getting nowadays is an AI. Not a bad thing. How you use AI is a different question. But you're in fintech specifically, let's talk about that because we talked about earlier. There's so many people doing the same exact thing. In med tech, in health tech, for this to succeed and for us to see more exits, IPOs, bigger companies that are worth potentially a mega liquidity event of some sort, you have to at some point acquire and build. You're seeing a bit of that happening. As a perfect example is this type of deal where a larger company acquired it, but we're seeing a lot of later stage companies opening up venture arms, from Jahez to I don't know what. There's Uniphonics is doing the list goes on, right? Salla's doing that in Saudi. A lot of them are in Saudi because they're large and well funded. And I think that is the build up for a potential liquidity event at some point. Let me start acquire. And just taking a step back, when Maktub was acquired, this is exactly what these guys did at Samih and the team. They went the last year of operations. Their base was great. Their content was good. They started acquiring blogs, portals, businesses that consolidated under the umbrella, built a large giant, and then flipped it, right? So M&A, definitely supportive, very difficult to make happen, but I would hope to start seeing that. And I think one of the, we sometimes as VCs like to write our predictions end of the year or early next year for the year coming. I've said the same thing for the past 3 years, more M&A, it's a time for M&A, it has not happened yet. So I was wrong there, but I would hope we'd see it more often now. But you're reading about that.
Yeah, before we move to Zeina, what do you think about the business model, Issa?
Content?
Free content with ads or paid content?
I don't know, man. Whoever cracks how to make money out of content is going to be a rich human being, right? Apple tried to do it now with Apple News and whatnot. But I've invested like 2 funds ago or 2 jobs ago, like this is now AccessBridge, when I was at 2-4, we were focusing on content across
media
gaming,
and
across written and media. Content is a very difficult space. There's not enough content in the Arabic world globally. Compared to how many people speak Arabic versus what's online. I can't remember what the latest figure, but 10 years ago, we would use to 1 to 2% of online content as Arabic. I don't know if it's still the case, probably. But more importantly, good content and how do you monetize that? Especially in the Arab world, people don't like to pay for content. They like to consume. So historically, content has been advertising driven. And then you take a look at who oversees brand advertising. That's a whole different ballgame, cannibalized by a few entities here and there. So content and monetizing content has been very, very challenging. The guys behind Majera, Ahmad and Abdel-Salam, if I'm not mistaken, I've met them many times when we were at 2-4 because they were operating back then from there. These are people who've been in content all their lives. They understand this space and have been very successful at it. So we have a few successors. I would say this is one of them. Mandour, I don't know enough about, but they seem to be doing very well from the last funding rounds that we've read about and so on and so forth. But content and monetizing content is difficult. So if you crack that, you're going to be a very successful business. But more importantly, nowadays, with the fad or the hype or the boom in AI, content is king. Reddit as a business value has skyrocketed over the past year and will continue to do so. Why? Because of the content they have and how that translates into all these AI engines or AI algorithms or AI solutions we're seeing. That's where I think it will open up unique monetization for content players across the value chain.
For sure. Zeina, what do you think about the acquisition and the business model?
I believe Issa covered pretty much, but I think from an investor perspective, one of the challenges we say that already tapped into it is actually, if I'm acquiring another company, is managing the existing investors, which is sometimes it's a headache in terms of people they are not exiting. If you have a simple clause as liquidity preference could change things and could structure the things in a different way. But at the end of the day, we have seen structured exit in a way or another where swapping the shares from the company to go up. So this is good for the investor because now they were been in an early stage company, maybe pre-Series A, maximum Series A, and now they go to much, much bigger company that will make their exit or liquidity event actually is closer in terms of a timeline horizon. definitely we'll start to see it more. Like everyone hopes to be more frequent than now, but it eventually will happen, because I think people are starting to open their mind and see there's a different. I think back then everyone was saying, yeah, I want to be a unicorn, I want to IPO. All of the founders start to say this word, but now people are realizing, no, it doesn't have to be this way. Not all businesses going to this will be able to go that to be IPO'd or this, related to how big is the market that you're serving, and there's a lot of dynamics in it, and which market that you will list, and all of these question marks coming into this part. Second thing is, no, it will being acquired with a much bigger player, it will give me a good option of becoming. Some of the founders, they want to actually move to become a product person again, especially if he or she are tech driven. So not when you see this acquisition, some of them they have the same integrity and the brand still independent. Some of them they get integrated within the company, and the founder are happy, or the founders are happy, because now they will focus on building a business without the headache of the fundraising and all of that. So people start to open their eyes for this option and this new outlets or venues of exits or doing that. And at the same time, the investors still will learn more and help the startups within this direction, and to become more lenient in a way or another on their expectations, and putting the clauses that will not get back down later on. When it comes to content, it's a long-term game. It's not something on a short-term basis. And as an investor, you need to understand, as a founder, this is eventually it will, you will be able to crack, someone will crack it and everyone will follow it. But it is not something that on the 5 years horizon thing, it has longer than this. And maybe AI will accelerate it.
Well, thank you so much, Issa, Zeina, and Jamie. It was very insightful. I really enjoyed the conversations, and hopefully we'll see you again in an upcoming episode. Thank you.